Welcome to the Women of War podcast series. I'm your host, Olivia Nunn, and today I've got a special treat for you. I have an incredible guest. I have Becca Spahr, who is a Marine veteran, someone who has served for 20 years, and she is not a stranger to serving in high-pressure environments. She is also someone who knows how to perform with teams. She knows how to not only just lead, but lead with intention. And so I really want to dig in and talk to her about her experience, what it means to be a woman, not only in uniform, but what it means to serve with men and what that really is like. So Becca, thank you so much for spending time with me and sharing your story with Women of War.
Thanks, Olivia. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, so let's kick it off and kind of share with the audience, because, you know, we had an intro conversation about your experience in the military and what it's like being a woman in the military, having worn that uniform. And we already know that women make up the minority in service. So what was it like being a Marine in uniform?
The Marine Corps is the service that has the least number of women. So we hover at around 9% women in our ranks. That's combined officers and enlisted, and the officer side's even a little bit less. So very often you're truly the only woman in the room. And that was something that I didn't really give a whole lot of thought to, I think, going into it. I guess maybe because you just don't know what to expect, but it became more and more of something that I was experiencing as I went on through the ranks. And especially, you know, as you get promoted, there's even fewer and fewer women. So although I wouldn't say that it was something that it was at the front of my mind, like initially when I was first doing my training, so I didn't feel different all the time. Sometimes I did. But as I got higher in rank, I just realized more and more that, you know, I'm the only woman in here, or I'm one of two women in this room of 50 people. And so then it became more important for me to make sure that I was representing, make sure that my voice was being heard, that if I didn't have a place at the table, I made one, because I felt like I owed it to myself, but I also owed it to the women who had gone before me and the ones who would come after me.
So, you know, what did you do in the Marines? I think, you know, everyone is interested in knowing, you know, you hear it often, like everyone in the Marine is infantry first, but you know that you have an actual duty that you are, you know, specific to. So what did you do in the Marines?
I was a manpower officer, which is basically HR, what you would call HR in most of the other services. So that looked a lot of different ways. As a lieutenant, I was in charge of all of the HR support for a battalion of about 2,000 people and deployed doing that, which was a unique experience, having to provide HR support when you're in a forward environment and you don't have the same systems that you might have back home. And then also you're dealing with things like casualties, which isn't something you would deal with in garrison. But then I went on to lead different levels of administrative support all the way through my last tour, which was with Special Operations Command. And I was with the J1 there, providing the support to all the Marines with SOCOM. So, and then I took a few little side quests. I did protocol for a little while. I worked on recruiting duty, not as a recruiter, but I worked within the headquarters. And then I also was very fortunate that I was able to get a graduate degree as a Marine. So I got a year to do that. So that's kind of a snapshot of my career.
So you talked about deployment. Where are the fun places when you talk about, not that deployment's ever fun, but it does add to a roundness, I would say, in terms of your ability to grow and to learn and develop, especially as an officer, as a leader. So where did your deployments take you?
I actually really enjoyed deployments. Obviously, there's hard things about it, like leaving your family and leaving some of the comforts that, you know, you would normally have at home. But life is so much simpler when you deploy. It's like all you have to do is show up to work, go to the gym, eat, repeat. And so, I mean, I was lucky in the places I deployed, they had a gym, they had laundry service. So it made my life much easier, and highly recommend to mothers of young children, because I got 6 months to do that in Kuwait. I was in Kuwait for 6 months. I deployed to Ramadi, Iraq for a year. And then I did some shorter, I don't even know if I would really call them deployments, but exercises in the Philippines, and also lived and worked in Okinawa, Japan for 4 years.
As you're talking and you said the simplicity of deployment, and I do have to agree, I did 3 tours to Iraq. While, it's a very high stressful time and it is an intense period, but at the same time, there is simplicity to it. Like you said, there is a structure. Mm-hmm. There's this, what's expected, even though there's some unexpected times that come with it. There's this, you just know, you show up at this very specified time. You know what your tasks are. And it's a rinse and repeat. You come to work, you eat, you hit the gym, mm-hmm. Because there's nothing to distract you. It's not like you're going to hop in your car and like go to the movies or go to the mall. I mean, all of those things that you would kind of identify with home isn't there. Mm-hmm. So, just as you were talking about that kind of flashed back to that. Talk to me about your time in service where you were talking about where you were often the only woman in the room and how you had to make space for being the only woman. What did you mean by that?
Well, I think it's about perception. So I, as I was saying, as I went on in my career, I became more perceptive about the fact that I was the only woman or one of a few. And so showing up and making sure people knew I was there and that I was going to participate. That's a big thing. You can be there and you can sit there, but unless you're actually making space and using your voice and contributing in meetings, contributing your ideas, raising your hand, getting people to listen to you, like you have to take what you want in life, in all aspects of life. If you want something, it's probably not just going to get handed to you. So to sit around and wait for that to happen is kind of wasted time. So And then the other aspect of this is that a lot of times I felt like people underestimated me because I was a woman. As an HR person, as an officer, just because of the nature of our training, we enter the fleet, meaning the operating forces in the Marine Corps, much earlier than most other occupational specialties because our school is very short. So I was a second lieutenant. I had only been in the Marine Corps for like 7.5 months and was at a battalion running all of the admin for 2,000 people. And on top of that was basically the administrative assistant to the battalion commander. So even though, a year in, I was still a second lieutenant, but I had a lot more experience than the other second lieutenants because they were just starting to arrive to their first duty station. So one of my first commanders, the one I deployed under, one time said to me, and I wasn't sure whether I should take this as a compliment or not, but he said, at the time my last name was Moore, he said, "Lieutenant Moore, you're surprisingly competent for a second lieutenant." I was like, I think that's a good thing, but I'm not really sure.
As you're talking, there are just so many flashbacks as to, my time back, and I'm like just nodding in agreement, just like, yep, been there. And I'm sure there's so many women that could just totally identify with what you're saying. Did you feel at any time in your service did you feel like there was more times that men were more welcoming or less welcoming to you in terms of helping you want to succeed or not succeed? What was your take during your 20 years?
Well, that's a good question about like wanting me to succeed or not. I had some mentors early on. I had a really phenomenal XO at my first duty station who really took me under his wing. He saw that I was a hard worker and that I could and wanted to bring a lot of value to the team. And so I think that he invested in me a lot, and he really had my back. I mean, anytime somebody would try to say that I wasn't doing it right, or that I didn't have the authority to do something, he was immediately on my side and would make sure that he set them straight. Or in the event I wasn't doing something right and it was legit, feedback, he would take me aside and say, hey, this is what we need to change, in a way that didn't make me feel inferior or stupid or anything like that. So he was really one of the first really good leaders that I learned how to be a leader from. So in that regard, yes, I had people early on in my career who were willing to invest in me. I think as I kind of moved on in my career, I feel like I continued to have that. I don't really remember a lot of times where I felt like, oh, these guys are out to get me because I'm a woman. I mean, every once in a while you meet a jerk and you just kind of have to, ignore them or hope that you don't have to interact with them too much. But for the most part, I felt supported. But I would, and I kind of mentioned this before, I would say that I felt underestimated a lot. One story that kind of comes to mind was when I was a major, I got sent to the Philippines to be the deputy operations officer for a multinational exercise. A pretty big one. It's called Balakatan. It happens every year. And the person who was supposed to be the operations officer, a lieutenant colonel, I'm not sure what happened, but he kind of showed up late and left early. So I ended up basically being the operations officer for all but a few days of this 6-week long evolution. And so I was running the commander's update brief one evening, and we had some visitors came from a higher headquarters to observe. And there was a colonel there, a Marine colonel. And I ran the whole meeting. I went around the table and everybody gave their briefs and their updates. And at the end, he came up to me and he goes, wow, I had no idea a woman could run a meeting like that. And I'm like looking for the hidden cameras. Like, I think it was like 2016 or 2017 at that point. Like, are you kidding me? Those words aren't supposed to come out of your mouth. Don't say that, man. But again, I mean, I do think that he was saying it in a complimentary way. It was just maybe not the best delivery.
Yeah, women been around. Surprising. What about working with women? You talked about earlier 9%, right, in the service of all the branches. The Marine Corps has the least amount of women. So you didn't see women as often within the ranks. So did you have women mentors and or were you a mentor to other women? And how were they in your evolution in terms of leadership? Did you find them to be helpful or did you find more cattiness?
I wouldn't say I had a lot of women mentors because to me, a mentor isn't just like, hey, we should go to lunch and then this happens once. And like, yeah, maybe you get some nuggets out of it and like, it's helpful to know this person. But to me, a mentor is like a more meaningful relationship that lasts over time. They're taking an interest in you versus just being interested in you. So I didn't really have any like strong mentor type of relationships. I also never had a woman supervisor until I had been in probably around 15 or 16 years. It was the first time I ever had a woman as a boss. And I did have Marines like my like senior enlisted. I did have some women a little bit earlier on. So, you come across them, and in HR that is a little bit more, woman heavy. So it's a little more common. But as far as learning from them, I would say overall very positive. There was a lot of sharing of resources and a lot of just listening. I found that especially when I became a mother that, just having somebody to kind of talk to and who had lived through that and could say, I've been there, I get it. People don't understand about childcare. Hey, when your kid throws up in the backseat on your way to work, like you're going to be a little bit late. There's some things you can't get around. But also sometimes there was that competition that you see among women, which which really is an evolutionary trait. Women evolved to act that way because when there is a lack of resources, then you have to compete with each other to see who's going to, the strongest will survive. Unfortunately, that tendency to compete with one another is very deep in our reptilian brains. And so for some women, it's hard to shake, and others have to be mindful about not being that way with other women. So, but I was always conscious of not being competitive with other women. And I think that by modeling that was helpful in my own interactions, that then people weren't as competitive with me. You always run into a few people, and then you get the people who are just clueless. I had my first female supervisor. I was overseas in Okinawa. We had just moved there. My husband was also on active duty as a Marine at the time. And he got an assignment to go to Korea for a few weeks. Well, then I found out I was going to the Philippines for a few weeks, and we were going to overlap maybe 3 or 4 days. We had 2 little kids. Our kids were, little, like 2 and 5 maybe at the time. And you can't just leave food out like they're a cat, right? So we had to come up with a plan. How were we going to fill in these few days? And I thought, I know how these exercises go. They have you get there early. There's a lot of like build up. And at the end, there's like the breakdown. I'm like, I bet if we just talk to the right person, he can leave a couple days early. I can go a couple days late. It won't be a big deal. So I approached my boss about it, hoping she would be reasonable. And I explained to her the situation. And she just very flatly said, well, you have a family care plan, right? And I said, yes, I have a plan. I would prefer to avoid buying my mother last minute international plane tickets to have her come here and sit with my kids for 3 days if we could avoid it by just, shifting the schedule a little bit. And she was not really willing to make that change. So thankfully, she didn't have children, which I think may be why there was not this understanding. And, as I said, we had just moved there. So it's not like we had like really neighbors that I would just leave my children with for several days too. So anyhow, my husband and I were able to work it out by talking to, whoever we figured out the right people to talk to, and we're able to shift a little bit. But it was that just 1, lack of compassion, 2, lack of understanding in supporting another woman who's trying to be a Marine and trying to be a mother and trying to be a wife. And unfortunately you don't always get that support. So you have to look for it in other ways.
As you're sharing that story, that made me think about my own experience, because I became a mother late in my career. I was a field grade officer. I was a major by the time I became a mother. And I found that it was women that actually kind of made being a mom and a soldier difficult. Just like pumping, right? Just taking the time out to go pump, and just being able to do that. I found like other women were more scornful and judged me and gave me, hard times over it, and just kind of, it's like, why? Oh, you're leaving class yet again. And, it's like, you're taking too long. Mm-hmm. And I found that very shocking. But the guys in my class, because I was doing it during, Command General Staff College, they were the most supportive. They're just like, hey, Olivia, is there anything you need? I remember one time I'd forgotten parts of my pump, and I had to figure out what to do. And it's not like you can't, mm-hmm. pump. And they're just like, oh, maybe I could call my wife. She lives right down the street. Maybe they've got extra parts. Like, I found that the guys were more helpful than the women in my class. Mm-hmm. And I find that kind of sad. That, here you are, you're a fellow woman, mm-hmm. and you wear the uniform too, that you would understand. Mm-hmm. I always kind of thought that was a little bit of a bum.
Yeah, you expect and should be able to expect that your sisters are gonna support you and try to help you out, especially because there are so few of us statistically. Like, shouldn't we all be helping each other out and talking each other up and making introductions and, saying, oh, sir, Olivia had this great idea. Olivia, can you tell him what you thought? But I don't think that I don't think that we are like raised to act that way. And because there is a lack of women in the higher ranks, it's not modeled for us. And so again, some women will fall back to that like competition mindset and think like there's not enough to go around. Well, there is enough. There are enough promotions to go around. There is enough success. There are enough good billets. Everybody gets the same amount of time off. We're all getting paid the same, within a rank. So that competition shouldn't really exist at all. I mean, I guess in certain situations, and maybe it was because you were in school and there were like, I don't know, did they do like a class rank maybe?
They did, but to me, like that never really mattered to me. But you're absolutely right. There was always enough, and I think, when you are younger, there was definitely, I know I had that mentality too, right? You're striving, you're working hard because I wanted to be a troop commander, so you did everything you can to be noticed, to be at the top, to work your way to, in some ways, kind of claw your way to the top so that you can get the best command billets. And especially when you're the only female, and oftentimes in those environments and where you're walking into a room and you have to constantly prove yourself, right? Where you're constantly being judged that I am supposed to be here. And you are looking at me as if I'm not supposed to be here, not because I've said anything or done anything. It's just because by the gender.
Yeah.
You have weighed and judged me by the way I look, by the lack of height or not height that I have, by how much I weigh or don't weigh, by what accoutrements my uniform may or may not have. Like everything about me, you've already weighed against me. And I have to constantly come in every single day to prove that I have what it takes to be in this room along with my peers. And there's that intense competition or need, like you said. And I think that really never leaves, especially when we look at our fellow sisters in uniform. And I don't think I really made that switch until I was a field grade officer, where I just finally was like, screw it, I'm so done. I'm so done. I'd rather, I think the saying, I'd rather fix crowns than take them off, because I was so done with that rat race.
Yeah. And you kind of touched on that. There's a point at which you can decide, is it more worthwhile for me to compete with these other women who are my peers, or to compete with like the organizational culture, the beliefs? We're all going to look better if we can perform better. You should never say that another woman is in any way, any negative thing about them, because that's just adding to the problem. Building each other up is the only way that we're going to get ahead. And then the other thing you kind of just mentioned was feeling like you were allowed to be there, like you belonged. It's hard when you're walking into an organization and it's maybe 20% women to feel like you belong. And that's not just gender, that would apply to race, sexual orientation, any of that. And so creating that sense of belonging for each other is important, but also I think reminding yourself that you're allowed to be there. And that is something that I did not do a good job of when I was young. I went into the Marine Corps already thinking I was less than, because I couldn't run as fast as the guys. I couldn't do as many pull-ups as the guys. I mean, I was smoking them in all of the academics stuff. I was smoking them on any kind of leadership, but physically I wasn't competing with men who were 19, 20 years old and in the best shape of their life. And so that made me, that was terrible for my confidence as a young woman. And so it made me think, I don't belong here. I don't even deserve to be a Marine. I couldn't climb that rope in under a minute, so I don't even deserve to be here. Why do I even have these things on my collars? I don't deserve this. So I think for young women who are, thinking about the military or they've already joined, like, I would tell them, you have to believe that you are allowed to be there, and you have to believe that you are enough.
I love that you say that. And we touched briefly on this conversation before, that that is so true. And I want to preface and say that we are different. Biologically, we are born different. Men and women are different. And that is totally okay. Mm-hmm. That is totally okay. But I think it is so hard to, one, believe in that and be at peace with that when it is such a culture that it is prized in this culture, in the military culture, that you should be this fine specimen of health and physicality. Mm-hmm. And the standard is bared against a male at 18, 19, 20 years old. And I could never meet that standard. Mm-hmm. And did I do well? Yes. But that wellness was still failing at a male standard, which was the standard. And that permeated in everything that I felt about myself. Mm-hmm. I exactly like what you said. I am failing at life because I cannot perform at the physical standard in which it's required. Even though they said, yeah, here's a female standard, but that's not what the culture mm-hmm. was telling you. The culture was like, yeah, you're not good enough. Mm-hmm. And so that made me question everything about me in terms of my ability and capability to perform, even though I knew I was smart and I'm supposed to be here and I can do it, but it made me question every single day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it gets inside your head. And unless you are somebody who is like already very, very comfortable in their skin, very accepting of themselves, that's really hard to fight off. And what young woman is very, very accepting of herself?
No.
Yeah, I mean, that's just, it's the world we live in. And so you're walking into it already at a disadvantage. So it's very much mindset. You have to, I think, have a growth mindset where you're taking feedback not as criticism but as room for improvement. You're meeting obstacles with, I'm going to get over this and get better, not, oh, I give up. You're seeing the effort of others and thinking, I can do that too, not, oh, that's too much, that's too hard, she can do it but I can't, or he can do it but I can't. So you have to have that growth mindset where you're always trying to make yourself better. And then you also cannot have a victim mindset where you think, this is happening to me, I'm helpless to do anything about these bad things that happen. There's just a lot of picking yourself up by your bootstraps and carrying on, probably more than maybe the guys have to do it. But then what are you doing? You're building resilience. So, I mean, you want to talk about strong women, like look at in any military service, on any military base, they've gone through it and have, hopefully make it to the other side stronger. Unfortunately, not all do. And a lot of people have to make unthinkable sacrifices in their lives to get to a point where they do feel comfortable. But I mean, yeah, I will say that I'm a very, very resilient person thanks to the military.
Yeah, I totally agree. I do say resilience is probably one of the key things that I've learned. Mm-hmm. Talk to me about, we talked about in terms of you not having a female boss leader within your career until you're very senior. But what was it like you being the boss for men, right? Because you were the minority. What was the feedback that you got? Because I know I got a ton of feedback being, commander for men for the first time. What was it like for you?
Yeah. Well, I don't think anyone really ever said to my face that they, thought of me differently because I was a woman. But I did have a Marine who was pretty senior, and I took over the admin shop for a Marine logistics group. So I don't know. I think maybe we were around 4,000 or 5,000 people. I don't remember. So pretty big. And he and I had a common friend, and that common friend told me what this guy thought about me. And he said he did not want to work for a woman, that he would not work for a woman, and that he would never call me ma'am. And he didn't. He called me boss. every time we were in a meeting, if he came into my office, hey boss, I got to ask you about this. Hey boss, I got this going on. And I don't know. I don't remember if I ever confronted him about it, but I did always get a little bit of a chuckle because to me, it was like, calling me boss is even better than calling me ma'am. I mean, you say ma'am to the lady you hold the door for, or ma'am to the checkout at the grocery store. If you're calling me boss, I have arrived. So I was fine with it. But, and then I did have, not when I was the leader, but I definitely had men who said things like, I'm going to make you quit. You don't deserve to be here. I mean, terrible things that I won't even say on the podcast. And I mean, thanks, bullies, because you just made me want to do this even more. So
I can relate to all of those things that you've said. I've heard them. At times when soldiers didn't think I was around in the room.
Oh yeah,
shocking to hear. But I actually also had soldiers that told me, thanks, man, for proving me wrong, which I thought was probably the best compliment ever.
Yeah.
But yeah, heard it all, right? Not supposed to be here. You can't do your job. Why are you even here? But like you said, it was just more fuel to the fire to prove that I'm supposed to be here. I'm just going to stick it through just to jab it to you. But you talk about also being dual military in your career because your husband served too. What was that like? Because, I also did that too. Was that, I have my own opinions on that. Did you find that more helpful for you? Did you find that harder for you? I'm just curious, what was that like?
A little bit of both. There were times like when I relayed that story earlier about like both of us having to deploy at the same time, and then what do you do for the childcare? We're stationed at two different places, so we have to get a house in the middle. But then I've got a long commute and you have a short commute. But I think overall, being in the same profession, we were able to provide a level of support to each other that I think a lot of married couples don't have, because I could come home and say, oh my gosh, listen to what happened. I don't have to explain any acronyms. I don't have to explain that a colonel is higher than a lieutenant colonel, but it's not as high as a general. So, because he always, he had the same, background. So in that way, I think that it was very helpful to be dual military in terms of like supporting one another. But yeah, logistically, it would get tough. And, as anyone who has a full-time job and their partner has a full-time job, it's hard to balance that and a family and time to yourself and all of that. So, but my husband, he came off of active duty earlier than me. So he came off of active duty I guess around a little bit before our first daughter was born, and he maintained a commission in the reserves. So he was still active in it. And then later on, he would come back on longer periods of active duty orders. So we kind of had a hybrid experience where there were times when he wasn't on active duty, but there were times when he was for, 6 months or a year at a time. But overall, I think that, it was helpful to me to have a spouse who was also a Marine and could understand what I was going through.
I have to relate to all of that, and I agree with that. It was definitely helpful, especially the acronym part, right? Just coming back and you could say A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and they're like, yep, completely understand everything you said, and there was not a translation needed.
Right. Such a time saver.
So you've moved on. You have retired from the Marine Corps. Talk to me about what has life been like for you since you've hung up the uniform. What has that been like being a woman outside the uniform? And because I feel like we are invisible, and I'm just curious, do you find that to be true, or is that something that you find easy to be able to relate back? Just curious as to what your experience is like.
Thank you. That is a great question. And it is one that is not asked anywhere near enough. And I think all veterans and retirees go through that transition of kind of becoming a civilian again. But for women, it is it is unique because one, people don't look at you and me and think she spent the last 20 years wearing a uniform and kicking butt and taking names. They just see a woman in her, in midlife. And two, we don't talk about it, I don't think. I feel a little uncomfortable having a keychain that says USMC retired on it because I'm afraid somebody's going to look at it and ask me if those are my husband's keys. And I do get that question. People will say to my husband, thank you for your service. And then what do? I guess I just sit here. You can't really be like, oh, thank me for my service too. You can't say that. But I retired 2 years ago, and I took about a year and a half to just relax, let my brain scab over, process what happened, settle in our new area, get the house together, get the kids started in their new schools and all of that stuff. I became a master gardener through Penn State, which was something that I had wanted to do for a long time. So I took that time to do something I wanted to do instead of being, working and being at the beck and call of my boss or the service or whatever. But then I started to feel like I need to be doing something more meaningful to serve where you are committing basically all of your waking hours and some of your sleeping hours to your country. And then to just hit the brakes and not do that anymore, I think is really jarring on your brain. And so I'm happy that I took some time off, and it gave me a lot of time to reflect and figure out what I really wanted. But I was eager to get back into something. And so I thought about it a lot, and I eventually dusted off my life coach credentials, which I had become credentialed a few years ago, and kind of did it like on the side for a little while. And I thought, well, I feel like I have a message to teach people about leadership. I feel like I'm a good leader, and my team's always related to me. I was far better in the emotional intelligence area than a lot of my male peers. And so I thought, I can help people with this. So I toyed with the idea of becoming like a leadership coach, and I got my website all set up. And then I thought, no, I can reach more people if I'm doing this in more of a group setting. And so I decided to become a speaker and be able to speak to audiences of 20, 200, 2,000 people about the importance of being an authentic leader and balancing likability with authority. Because there is a way to do it. And I think what happens is that a lot of leaders are kind of walking through things blindly, and they don't ever sit down to think, what is my leadership style based on my personality? Because they get thrown into leadership. They've been at the job so long, and then the one guy leaves, so now they're in charge, but they don't really think about it. And so they sort of fall into what's comfortable. So for some people, that is being kind of heavy-handed, authoritative. We're here to do a job, we're going to get it done, and this is how we're going to do it. Some people feel uncomfortable being that way, and so they want to be really nice and warm. But nobody wants to work for a jerk, and nobody wants to work with somebody who just is kind of always off with the butterflies. So you've really got to learn how to balance those two. And the people who are really successful, great leaders, I think, are the ones who figure that out. So that's the message that I bring to audiences is balancing that likability with authority. And then I'm also working on becoming a relational health coach so that I can understand a little bit more of like the science behind the ways that people relate to each other and connect with each other. And we'll hopefully have more in store about the ways that we make friendships, make meaningful connections that don't just go surface level, but that last for a long time, that we're feeling fulfilled. Because that connection, having a stable and a supportive social circle, is over and over again. I mean, there's new studies coming out every day, excuse me, that it is better for your mental health, your physical health. It reduces depression and anxiety. It increases the length of your life. So in a world where we're becoming increasingly disconnected, being able to study what makes humans connect and then why it's important and how we can apply that is something that I feel really passionate about and want to bring to people. So that's what I'm doing.
No, I love all of that. And I agree with the last part. I think just being able to dig deeper into friendships, especially as we get older. I think when you're younger, it's easy to create friendships, but I think when you get older, especially when you're kind of set in your ways and you're kind of into, certain things, I've talked about this before. It is increasingly hard to create meaningful, deep relationships that you can really hold on to, especially when you're in a stage of your life where you've got kids, or maybe your kids are about to leave and you've just finished a career and now you're starting, like, there's just so much, especially I think as military women, where you're just in this very unique mindset and in part of your life that I think it's kind of hard to find another person, especially another woman that's going to really understand that, who's going to dig deep with you on another level and be there for you. Especially because I think at this point of your life, I'm in my late 40s. There's trauma there, right? There's trauma who's going to be there beyond that superficial, like, hey, how are you doing? Oh, I did this, and that flyby grocery store conversation. Someone that's going to get you and want to be there, like you said. So right. I love that.
And there's a lot of pressure to have those relationships. Like, even as kids, it's like, well, who's your best friend? And so, well, should I always have a best friend? But statistically, women turn over their friendships about once every 7 years. They're like close friendships about every 7 years. But I think that in the military, that is very accelerated, because you're turning your friends over with every duty station a lot of times. So we're talking every 2 or 3 years, you're having to redo all these friendships, and maybe you hang on to one or two kind of along the way. But when you're not in proximity with each other where you can see each other on a regular basis, that's really hard to maintain those. And that's why, I felt a little silly calling myself a connection expert at first. It's like, well, I'm just making this up. But I'm like, no, I was a military kid and I was in the military myself for 20 years. I've been figuring out making friends since I was born. I do this all the time, and I've been more successful at it sometimes than I have at others, but you learn a lot along the way. So I feel like I have a lot of good experience that I hope to be able to share with people. And for your listeners, who a lot of them are in the military or in the military community, that is very much a must do, is surrounding yourself with those people who are going to back you up and help you out, and say, your kids can stay at my house for 3 days because your boss is being a jerk about sending you to the Philippines.
Absolutely.
You absolutely have to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Becca, I loved our conversation. I could stay on all afternoon and talk to you about all kinds of stuff. I'm sure that we've got so many more touch points that we could relate to, just, time in service or deployments. While branches are different, I know that there's so much that's so much more connected. My point in this is that while we make up the minority in the service, our connection and service is what is important and what draws us close. And I want people to hear our stories, because we are very connected, right? We have such similar stories, whether we're on the officer side or on the enlisted side. We've got very similar stories, and I want people to hear it, because I don't want us to be invisible. I want people to hear those that have trailblazed before us, and I want those that come after us to know that there have been women like you that have, kicked down the doors and taken names and done amazing things for our country. So thank you. Thank you so much for spending time with me.
Thank you, Olivia. And your podcast is doing it. You're bringing the message. So I hope that people will share this with other women who have a link to the military community, so that we can get, as many people to feel like they have that sense of community that doesn't really exist a whole lot for women veterans, not as much as it should. So thank you for the work that you're doing.
Thank you. I appreciate it.